I have a motion to open the meeting? Been moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. We'll start right now. Under old business, foreclosures, and first one is 1005 Augusta Road.
Yes, this is the ideal property that we were moving forward to sell at the last meeting. However, that subsequent to that meeting, the idea is to get paid people all of the taxes on lien. And what this is a quick claim deed that we would give, and it's basically up for your signature tonight.
Okay, do I have a motion to accept this?
Move to accept it.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
And the original will be coming around for you.
I should have asked if there was any questions, but I think we,
The question that one, did
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next one. 23 Ambrose Cove Road.
Yes, this is a foreclosure that we've been working on in terms of allowing the owners to provide the occupants to repurchase their property. They come in good faith, provided for a couple down payments. This is a land purchase agreement at the last meeting. There were some questions about that. I provided a little overview, some addendum in the document that essentially kind of tried to answer those questions, recognizing that there are some concerns with all three options for the reacquisition of the land by the former property owners. But because of the cost imposed by the two options that we didn't talk about, that were the lease purchase, and then there was another town-held mortgage option. Both of those would require anywhere from 2 to 3 hours of legal time at a cost of $230 an hour, as indicated by the lawyer. I didn't think it was appropriate to impose that. There are some issues with every one of these options in terms of potential failure to pay. But should that happen, we can recoup any cost out of the sale of the property should we move forward. So I remain advocating for, recommending the land purchase agreement that we put in for last meeting.
Thank you. Mike?
Dennis, how is this different from the agreement we ran into trouble with property a while ago that they came in and set up a time payment plan?
I have no idea, I didn't realize that you had one of those, but this is basically, it's a land purchase contract. We need the land for the people.
Well, I wasn't involved, but I heard about it, was property on Hoyt's Island, I think.
I don't recall that.
I don't-
And it may have been a.
This is the only one that, in the past 5 years, I think this is the only one. There was a problem with a piece of property, but that had to involve something else. But there's only one other foreclosure that I'm aware of, it was last year, right? And that was on a property on Wings Mills Road.
This was before I was on the board, so.
Okay, so I'm aware of it, at least in the last 5 years. I can look into it, though, and provide you with some alternatives. But
Well, we have some tax acquired property that we put up for sale.
Right.
yeah, that's the one last year.
Yeah, the two.
And then we did the same thing back in 2008, I think there's another, we sold, the people didn't want anything to do with the property, said that we were harassing them, so we sold it.
Anybody else got anything you wanna?
No.
This meets all the requirements of law, so I
Right,
think.
that we had reviewed by the attorney.
All right, do I have a motion?
Move approval. You accept it?
Okay, they moved in second. Anybody else got anything they wanna ask about this before we go? Seeing none?
Well, no, I do.
Oh,
The
no.
only question I do want to ask is, do we have to give like a chance for people not to make a payment when the payment is due? And I realize that we're feeling like these people are probably going to make the payments when they're due. But if this is the precedent that we're setting for doing these sorts of things in the future, I guess I'm sort of hesitant to give people the leeway with not making the payment on the day that it's due.
In other words, you want us to follow the contract.
Well, it has like, purchase.
Well, there's a-
involved if
there's a-
it's more than
yeah.
15 days late, and then we have all of these things set up in place if it's past that So it's, they would already pass the point where it's due. And then if more than 15 days past that point, then we're gonna send you a letter. And I guess,
We're trying to,
and I guess for me, I just feel like, I'd like to see it tightened up if it's all possible to do. Moving forward, I mean, my philosophy is, when my mortgage payment is due on the first of the month, and they give me that 14-day grace period, my mortgage payment is due on the first of the month, it's always made by the first, if not before. So, I sort of feel like this is like a gift that essentially we're giving people. And,
well, we're giving them an opportunity to, I think I hear what you're saying. And it's up to you folks to decide what you want to do. But for me, these people own the property, there's no mortgage. And they have a real interest in getting this back. There are some real reasons behind that we can talk about in the executive session about why they got it done. But this option provides them with a real opportunity to get that back. They don't want to lose this property.
well, and then I do understand that, and that's not, I'm just saying, like, if this is the precedent that we're setting, or if this is how we feel like we may deal with some of these in the future, then, I get that we're not thinking these people are gonna use this clause to their advantage and potentially be 65 days late before any real action is taken. But who's to say that someone else, if we do this with them, isn't? So in the future, if it's possible for us to tighten this up legally,
Right. Here's the thing I would say. I would not propose this for any person that I wouldn't ask you to go into a land purchase agreement. In fact, the Maine Municipal Association tax lien laws advise you not to go into any lease purchase agreement like this unless you're confident that they'll pay. If you have a feeling that they won't pay, then you don't want to enter this type of agreement. So that's the, but we can always work to tighten that language up. Whatever you want to do.
Anybody else got anything? Seeing none, I entertain a vote. All in favor?
So we move forward without.
Aye. Thank you. The next thing on the agenda is approval of the ballot clerk, Hazelwood, Lois Hazelwood. There she is.
Do we know this woman?
I don't know.
Yes.
I can't-
Who?
I want to keep an eye on her, that's what I hear, but,
at least if we know where she is that day, that's
I'd
good.
entertain a motion.
Yeah, I'd move approval of Lois.
Second that motion.
Moved and seconded, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? 5. Now we're gonna move right on to new business. First thing on the agenda is the planning board.
Yes, if you want me to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, at the last meeting, there were some questions about current ordinance review, the current zoning ordinance review, and where the planning board was in that process, and I believe, Ricky, you asked that we invite the planning board and or the chairperson to come forward, so you can have a discussion about that.
Sure. So if I may, I just wanted to present to you some information and kind of our overall strategy still, and that's to make sure that we do have something ready for the voters for November. That is our plan.
Thank you, that was gonna be my question.
Yep. So, and I would want to mention that it has taken a long time, and everybody, I think, is quite aware of that. We've had our own frustrations internally, and I know other people would like to see it move at a quicker pace. Would like to explain, there has been some real reasons for it. Number one, applications have not slowed down in the winter like they have in the past. We have had a full plate. We've tried to do the best we can balancing out those other applications as well as shoreline zoning review ordinance work. So just to provide some context for you about that. Let's see, so looking ahead toward November and then backtracking, we want to have work done so we can hold the appropriate public hearings and notifications and all that sort of thing. We want to have a final, and so ahead of that, we want to have our final draft ready to go. Aiming towards that, we still have 3 more things to decide, and I can tell you about them in just a little bit. And other planning board members are here, and they feel free to chime in at any point. But the 3 last things that I'm aware of that we need to decide are whether or not to include kettle full bogs in the shoreline zoning ordinance. Number 2, whether to change the minimum lot size standards in Belgrade Lakes Village to be consistent with the town minimum lot size ordinance, which is now more stringent. And number 3, addressing the existing setback waiver provision in the village, which is illegal. So those are some things we still need to
Say that again?
address the existing setback waiver provision in the village, which is illegal. So those are things we need to hash out and go over and make sure we have some agreement, so that when we present the final draft, that there's some hopefully some good chance of passing. So those are some things we need to do. I did want to mention and give thanks to Denny for helping us update the data set, reaching out to the appropriate staff to help us get the shoreline zoning map and the data behind it into a new technology data set, which allows future editing to be very accomplishable, as opposed to, it was in an antiquated software and data that we couldn't even do anything with. So thank you very much, Denny, for helping us do that. And so what that does is set the stage for having a shoreline zoning map be up to date, and then have a shoreline zoning ordinance reflect appropriately those areas. Does that help?
Well, yes and no, I guess. I know you guys are busy, you guys do a heck of a good job, but I'm not here to throw you under the bus. My question is, well, back to that 30% rule that has already been passed by the state of Maine, I guess. That's what we asked you guys to move on. That's what I'm asking about. Is that part of?
That was the expansion?
Yes.
Yeah, we talked about that, and if any of the board members gonna chime in? Pete, you wanna?
Well, you go ahead and I'll chime in. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say, we discussed that at length and had voted unanimously, 4-1,
4-1.
that we would not, that we would do away with the volume, which is measurement, which has always been problematic. We are sticking with the prohibition against expansions within 25 feet of the lakes. So we're basically splitting the difference between the state model and the existing ordinance, which is more stringent than the state model. Trying to recall, what else is, we're continuing to allow for expansions away from the lake, but not towards the lake and not towards the sides.
And up to?
Up to the maximum height.
Right, whatever that is. So we didn't
Yeah.
change the height, or
Yeah.
there was nothing about that.
Yeah,
that would-
what we did not adopt, or what we're not planning to adopt, is the increases based on 30% of the existing footprint, because it becomes impossible to administer. There's no good documentation of what in 1987, Rich? 89?
It was back there in the 80s, it was before 89.
Yeah, so anyway, there's a benchmark back in the 80s that you're allowed, the state guidance allows you to make these expansions, except nobody knows what the dimensions of these buildings were on January 1st, 1989. It's kind of a ludicrous rule.
And to add to that, we really looked at the vulnerability or the ability for the town to look at its own data to say, what did we have for measurements at that time? So when George talks about that expansion, it was really, when we talked about it, at least in my mind, I was thinking, geez, how can we look at the town and say, based on the quality of the data and the records that we have for the property and structures in the shoreline zoning area at that time, if we do not have good data, can we make an informed decision about an expansion based on this idea of 30%? And if the answer is no, then I thought we'd be doing our town a disservice by going forward with that model. So,
We looked at town's tax records, which are pretty iffy in terms of documenting square footage and height for that time period. Also, a lot of times the tax records didn't, when they were actually physically evaluations done on the ground, didn't mesh well with 1989. We looked at satellite imagery, and we looked at aerial photography, none of which fall around 1989. So that, you know, you just can't really document very solidly what a particular camp might have been constructed, what its size, height, et cetera was.
I guess my question is, how are these other towns doing it? I mean, there's several towns that's already adopted this. How are they, I mean, is there anything?
Can I chime in on that? I gave people some information on that subject matter. And first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Peter Sargent, and I came here in 1987, and I bought property on this in Belgrade on the lake in '93.
Pete, pardon me, there's one person here who cannot hear you. If you wouldn't mind speaking up.
Okay, do you want to sit up front maybe? Can you hear me better?
This, right there is good.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. All right, my name is Peter Sargent, and I moved here in Maine in 1987. I bought property on the lake here in town, and so I live here year round. I get a pretty good feel for the lake. It's a living organism from my perspective. It changes from season to season, and actually, it changes during the day. It's pretty interesting situation. Okay, so I'm sensitive to what goes on, living in around the water. Okay, in the lake, and how things are affected by it. So, also, I've been in your select person's shoes as a select person back in the mid-'90s. I ran for selectman. I got elected. I went one term, so I got an idea, how you think and what's going on. I've been on the dams committee twice. I know I did the second time, but I did. And then I'm on the planning board right now, and also the comprehensive implementation team, working economic development with Denny a bit. So I kind of have a tendency to look at the big picture. And one thing I was curious about was, what are the other towns in the Belgrade, in our watershed? How are they approaching specifically really the 30% expansion? Are they including it in theirs or not? Okay, so I got on the internet over the weekend and got the documents, and I made up a sheet this afternoon, and I'm sorry I didn't make it typewritten, but and all that. But I just want to point out that the towns, okay, starting with Rome, their update to the Model Act, and they implemented it in March 2017, and that 30% expansion is not allowed, okay. For Belgrade, as you heard George speak there, then the draft, the 30% expansion is not allowed. And we still haven't quite decided on that, but that's where we're going with it. On Mount Vernon, they updated their shoreline zoning in June 2017, and 30% expansion is allowed. Oakland amended theirs back in 2014, and 30% expansion is allowed. Sydney, I'm not too sure when that one was amended, but 30% expansion is allowed. Smithfield, they expanded theirs, adopted theirs in March 2017. That 30% expansion is allowed. So, and then I said, okay, what I'm getting at is, what's the legal liability that this town will have in the event you get some litigation going on where let's say like Long Pond, for example, they have, you look at my old chart down there, Long Pond is, Belgrade has authority over that lake, Rome has authority over that lake, Mount Vernon has authority over that lake. So you've got three different towns controlling what's going on. So now, as I said before, Belgrade, would have no 30% expansion. Rome would have no 30% expansion. Or Mount Vernon, they got the 30% expansion. Now, let's take a look at some of the other lakes. You take East Pond, McGrath Pond. Belgrade, we don't allow the 30% expansion. Oakland does allow it. Then you take a look at Snow Pond. All right, Belgrade, we don't allow it. Oakland, they do allow it. And Sydney allows it. So you got different interpretation of the law. So you can bet, you got to consider the landowners coming in and buying the lakefront property. They're from away, and they're paying a lot of money for these properties, and they got deep pockets. So they find out, for example, let's say you go over in Snow Pond, and someone on the Belgrade side, they go for an application, and they want to take advantage of the 30% expansion. Well, because they heard the neighbors across the way. They do that. They're in the same Lakes Association. They all talk, and then and they find out they can't do it. And then they're going to think about suing Belgrade, and they're going to get involved with attorney's fees, litigation costs. Okay, can we afford it? Now that's supposition in my opinion. I'm just pointing this out to you to start thinking about, because if we got a budget to handle these kinds of costs going forward, and that's why I went through this exercise, and I gave you the information, and you need to kind of think about it, because as a select person, the additional costs coming down, may be coming down the pipe, and it's going to happen, because these people got deep pockets, and they like to be able to expand, to make the most of their property. So that's the way it works. I want to point it out to you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Memory, go ahead.
Is it possible, I know Ricky's question was towns that have allowed the 30% expansion. Is it possible to talk to someone in Oakland and see what the pros and cons have been with them allowing the 30% expansion? And what they're using for data to go, how they're determining what a 30% expansion from the original footprint is?
I can address part of that. Not this year, but last year. This was actually a subject at the Maine Water Conference. And one of the seminars was a series of code enforcement officers from around the state, along with LEA, which is Lakes Environmental Association, which is sort of the counterpart to BRCA in the Sebago Lakes watershed. And to a person, they all said it's a total nightmare and a headache to enforce. That they don't have, they basically said what we found ourselves was that there's no good sources that you can really hang your hat on of information that determine what on January 1st, 1989 was the actual dimensions and height of any given structure. The other aspect of that was just a general difficulty in enforcement. I didn't hear anything about cases going to district court where there was any live experience like that, whether a town won or lost on that basis. Pete had invited to the planning board, as you all know, Pete's on the planning board along with the rest of us, and the code enforcement officer for Smithfield, and he was just starting in Mount Vernon, and I guess he already was in Rome, Andrew Marble. He actually was one of the presenters at the conference, the water conference. The water conference, if you're not familiar with, is put on by the University of Maine's Mitchell Center. He's described to us what I just described to you, that it's very difficult to enforce, and he actually recommended Smithfield not adopt it. They chose to anyway, just because it was a little easier to do, because they just had to adopt the straight up state guidelines without making any modifications to it. I don't know what he did in Mount Vernon, or except that he's also the code enforcement officer in Rome. I can tell you, in terms of, if you look outside of our watershed, it's about 50-50 in terms of the number of towns that are keeping it versus the number of towns that are getting rid of it for administrative reasons. For example, most of the towns in the Sebago Lakes watershed are not planning to retain it.
Rich?
Yeah, Rich Baker from the planning board. And obviously, Peter's the one of the four of us that didn't vote, that voted for the 30% expansion, and the other four of us didn't. By not adopting or recommending the 30% expansion, I want to make it clear that we're not telling people they can't expand. There's the other part of the provision is that you can expand up to 10,000 square feet of building area within 75 feet of the water, and up to 1,500 square feet, no matter what the size of your building. If you're back 25 feet from the water, you can expand up to 1,000 square feet, or back to the 100-foot line, you can get 1,500 square foot. So a person can get a reasonable sized structure in that setback area if they're non-conforming. And I'd like to point out too that one of the, we talk about the enforceability and the difficulty with 30%. I used to deal with that all the time when I worked at DEP, and it is a nightmare. You find out you have planning boards that are issuing permits when nobody could prove what it was in January 1st, 1989. But the other provision, the part of the 30% expansion, that is that if you have a very large building near the water, and we allow for the 30% expansion beyond the limits of the square footage already, you get a very big building, that gets 30% expansion. Somebody has a small building near the water, they get up to 10,000 square feet. It's just that a big building getting 30% on top of that, as compared to a very small building, it's kind of unfair to let that great big building expand 30%. And we're talking about not just water quality and things of that nature, but one of the issues here is, and I know to some of the people, aesthetics is something we don't want to look at, but it's part of the law. It's part of what we want to see when we go to the lakes, is good shorelines, and to allow for large expansions within that setback area. Most of us on the planning board don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Can you state your name, sir? And-
Yes, Tom Cassidy. I'm a property owner in Belgrade. I'm on Snow Pond. And I just was curious about the expansion rule at 30%. Are you looking at square footage of the footprint of the building when you talk about expansion, or are you looking at volumetric expansion?
Footprint only. That was the change that was made at the
Now,
state level.
is there a limit already as to buildings that are within 100 feet of the water as to how many square feet they can be?
Yeah.
Yes.
Based on the setback. If you're,
And is it 1,000 square feet?
you can have 1,000 square feet within 75 feet of the water. If you can expand back so you're more than 75 feet, but less than 100 feet, you can get an extra 500 square foot, and you don't have to get 1,500.
And that is for the footprint only, so if you have a single-story building and you put a second floor on, it doesn't affect your footprint of the building?
No, it doesn't.
And what about foundation?
The
If you're on a stilt building and you wanted to put a full foundation under you?
you could do that. You might be required to move it back if it's reasonable. If say you're 20 feet from the water and you've got a lawn or whatever goes back 100 feet, and you wanna put a full foundation and basement under there, and it's on post now, we may require you to move it back some.
So if there is already a limit on the building size within distance of the water, you're saying that you're looking at potentially asking or allowing people to go a 30% increase on that?
No, we're saying we're not, we're proposing just using the square footage limitations, not the 30%. The law, the way the law says, you can have so many square footage or 30% of the footprint of the building, whichever is greater. That's what you can have. We're not proposing to adopt the whatever's greater provision.
Thank you.
Kenny?
I just wanted to say, without moving in one direction or the other on this issue, that this is the problem when you have multi-jurisdictions in a water watershed, right? So one of the ways to overcome that, and we've looked at that in the past, is coming up with a governmental authority or an entity that would be a watershed district. Now, I know that is a concept that hasn't gone very far, but we looked at code enforcement at one time, if you remember, trying to get code enforcement to be the same on a number of lakes and within various communities. So that's something that I think, I know I'll be working on with your support to see what we can do to develop a watershed district so that governing bodies or people that have jurisdictions within that water body, or those water bodies, adopt similar or the same rules so that everyone is treated equitably along the shoreline on those lakes. In terms of what will probably invoke legal action, it's more likely, not necessarily legal action, but some kind of financial action. It's more likely the quality of the lake water. As that deteriorates, people are going to spend lots and lots of money. And that's being exhibited by what's happening in Belgrade itself and around the lakes through the new organization, Seven Lakes Alliance, where several interested organizations have come together and are putting a fair amount of money with grants and all of that together to try to help stop the degradation and in fact maybe enhance the quality of the water in our lakes. And the only other question I have, it's a question, is how did the state think that they were going to have some means of allowing people to implement this? I mean, there had to have been some thought behind it before the state even before I'll answer Melanie's question, I'll be checking with the other towns.
So thank you for checking with the other towns. From my perspective, the answer must be, and I don't know this, but maybe Rich could weigh in, must be that if towns had good data on existing structures, then they could make an informed decision. To me, that's the easiest thing, is if you have good data, then you can make a decision, and it can pass the straight face test. In our town, in my opinion, we're lacking that. So in the absence of that good information, I would find it very hard or difficult if two decisions were made side by each properties, where one person said, geez, I didn't think that would pass the straight face test, but this guy got it. So there's no way, if we had those types of things, and we allowed the 30% expansion, that it would be easy to explain. So that was my take on the whole thing. It's really trying to serve the taxpayers and have the town in the best position to make a decision.
How?
Just listening to this conversation, it seems really frustrating to listen to the planning board say, the reason we can't look at an ordinance or look at a change is because we don't have good data. If you don't have good data, go back to wherever you've got data and work from that point and go forward. But why are you putting the onus of responsibility on the landowners and on the people who want to do expansion for your lack of data? I'm not saying you personally, planning board currently, but if the town does not have the data, we have it somewhere. Is it 10 years old? Is it 15 years old? Pick a time where you can defend it and go from that point and go forward. But to say, well, sorry folks, no, we didn't keep good records, so too bad, sucks to be you, just seems like a
I think we need to clarify that January 1st, 1989 is specified in law and state regulations. We have no control over picking the benchmark date. So we can't really do what you're suggesting. We have to mesh the data to the deadline, not the other way around.
Okay, Ann, would you?
Oh, my name is Kathleen Cassidy. I'm Tom's wife. And just to speak to this gentleman's concerns regarding the data, I certainly understand that, but having been involved in a prior matter with the town manager, I can say that a lot of the data that we needed was gone because of a fire that occurred. And it was at that time, the data wasn't computerized, it was all hard copy paper. And there was a fire and the records were gone, and there's nothing that you could do about that. I am grateful, from what I understand so far, that what the Brook Planning Board is talking about, that they're recommending not accepting the 30%, because we do have a small little camp, and we like our little camp. And, you know, several hundred feet down the lake, there's a ginormous, what I would call a Kennedy compound. You know, they have planes, and they have boats, and they have, and they're loud when they come on the weekends, and the idea that they would be able to expand 30%, that really scares me, because the aesthetics is important. And I would say when you're talking about aesthetics as well, that goes to noise, because the larger these properties get, the more noisy it's going to be, and it just completely takes away from enjoying the Belgrade Lakes. And so I'm really grateful that they're not considering the 30% or greater language, because I think that you will end up, you know, losing a really important part of what Belgrade is.
Thank you. Jack?
Just a point of clarification, in the discussion earlier, it was mentioned a couple of times, a building of 10,000 square feet. That's a big building.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I heard that right. That's a building that's 100 feet by 100 feet. Did I hear that right?
I think you're
I'm
right.
sorry, 1,000 square feet. If I
Right.
said
You
10,000.
said
You did say
10,000.
10,000.
I thought you misspoke.
I didn't think that was a lot.
1,000 and 1,500.
I think excitement was in the air and it got the best of us.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm calmed down.
Okay.
May I ask them, because again, we own property here, but we're residents of a different town. It's property that's been in our family for decades. How do these huge houses, way more than 1,000 square feet, get built right down the shore from us, if there's a limit on how big these houses can be? They are huge, they're way more than 1,000 square feet. How did that happen if there's a limit on?
How long has the house been there?
Well, they look relatively new, don't they? I mean, a couple of them,
Well, if they're back 100 feet from the water.
they can be more than 1,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no limit, really. There's limits, but the 1,000 square feet deals
It's
with within
less than 100,
75
okay,
feet.
Yeah.
thank you.
Anybody got any questions up here?
That's all. Commendable.
I commend them, and I'm getting more and more educated all the time.
You
But
mean from
I
us?
agree.
You mean from us?
I don't think so.
I knew that one.
Yeah.
I had to put a
You
plug
knew
in.
better, you knew better than that. No, and I would simply say that I'm with Denny in terms of really looking at how we can better consolidate our efforts around all the lakes in terms of preserving them, because they are our economic engine. And if we lose that, then it means higher taxes for all the people that are living on the non-lake shore property.
Anybody else got anything they wanna ask or add to this? I guess you got my answers somewhat. I'm not sure I'm real tickled with them all, but, you know, we got people that wanna move on and.
Sure. So I have a question.
Oh, you got a question? Go ahead.
So where do we go from here? I mean, so what you're stating might be voted upon in November.
Mhm.
What are we looking to vote on? We're not
Whatever
looking,
they come up with.
we're,
Right,
I
right.
mean, are you thinking of putting the 30% thing up for vote or?
No,
Proposal
not
akin
in by
to that.
itself. So what we have so far is we made additions or revisions to
Yeah.
the draft. This part that we're talking about,
Mhm.
that, like George was talking about, we've sort of split the difference.
Mhm.
Not the 30% expansion, like he said before. So at this point, that's in the revised part, which will be going forward. There are 3 more things that we need to discuss, and
Mhm.
we'll make decisions on those one way or the other. And that then will be then a draft and then final draft and public hearings and then hopefully a vote in November.
So these will be.
As Rich said, you know, there will be, expansions are gonna be allowed, it's just gonna be
Way.
They're like
yeah,
your
measured differently
modifications.
than by percentage.
It's like your board's modifications to the state's 30% rule, sort of like you're gonna amend it a little bit to, in your eyes, makes the best choice for the
For this town.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm in favor of that, sure.
I got one more question. George, you said that what, 1987 is when the law, or
89.
Because that's law, so how can you change, if that's law, how can you change anything in the law to fit Belgrade?
Good question. The way it's set up is the state regulations are a guideline, they're like a minimum guideline, and towns are allowed to be more stringent, you just can't be less stringent. And we've already checked with DEP, and there's no problem with what we're doing because we're being slightly more stringent than the state guidelines. The town's existing ordinance is considerably more stringent than the state guidelines now.
Yeah.
Just to directly answer your question, Representative Hilliard and Tom Saviello can probably provide you some guidance on that, but you can request that a bill go in to modify that provision of the law, and if the legislature votes on it, that changes the law, if they move to accept it. That's the direct answer to your question. The other point I want to make is the planning board is going through all of these hearings and everything, getting all, not hearings, but going through all this discussion, changing making a recommendation to the board. The board will then accept it and put it out to public hearings, right? Or the board won't, and then you'll be stuck with the existing law. So.
Okay?
Couple of questions. One is the square footage increase based on the size of the buildings in 89?
No,
What is it based on?
just,
Distance from the lake.
Yep, distance.
So it's additional square footage that can be put onto any building based on the distance they are from the lake?
Their maximums based on how far away you are from the lake.
Okay, but it doesn't make any difference how big the structure is
Currently,
currently
no.
for that, okay.
I'm
The
gonna
other
take
thing,
one more, oh, do you have another question?
the other thing that I have, in talking with some people from other towns, one of the things that they felt was going to be a benefit of allowing the expansion was it's going to bring in code enforcement regulations when people want to do it that will probably have a significant impact on primarily septic systems that are potentially not in very good code compliance at this point. And I'm just wondering if you've had any discussion with people from other towns and whether they've found that by allowing this expansion, they have gotten a lot of stuff cleaned up that was potentially harmful to the watershed.
I have not. I don't know if the town manager has heard anything about that or not.
I've heard the issue raised, and I understand where the potential for changing water, septic systems out, what the driving force behind that would be. You have to have a system size for the facility, but you make sure you meet the facility like that. But that's one of the questions I'll ask other towns that are implementing in this area.
I'm gonna ask Paul up here, I guess. Yep.
Yeah, Tom, I guess I've got a question on the database again. I mean, if I've potentially expanded my cottage 3 times since 1989, and then I come before the planning board and want to do another expansion, I guess I'm not clear what the database is that I haven't now added 3,000 square feet, let's say, to my cottage. I'm just not clear on that.
I can tell you that's one of the, when I used to work at DEP as the shoreline zoning coordinator, one of the problems that we had with towns is that we found that there were towns that were allowed more than 130% expansion because they didn't keep good records. And in the case of this, we'd have to go back through our permit files, I guess, to check to see whether there was an expansion beyond 30%. And I guess at this point, I can tell you we're not running back and forth looking at old files. Maybe we should, but
Let me, George.
I just want to clarify something and respond to Howard's question in a different way. We're approaching the whole issue of potentially failing septic systems, particularly aged septic systems, in a different way than just waiting for it to kind of happen, you might say, or when. Actually, it's not that different than what Howard was talking about. We're incorporating some language that was proposed as a change to state law that would require an inspection of the septic system at the time of property transfer. So when money's on the table, realtors have recommended that's the best time to do it.
It's happening all the time now.
And it's happening all the time now, but not uniformly. And so that would ensure that we discover failing systems at that point in time when it could be dealt with in the course of the negotiations between buyer and seller.
I could tell you more of that if it wasn't on tape. Reasons. Kenny?
It would seem that when you went through an expansion, that wouldn't there be some addition to, I mean, it doesn't seem like that would be left undocumented someplace, either by a deed or by whatever, you know. Am I wrong? I mean, is there a place for that to be documented other than
Tax bills.
tax bills?
Yep.
But, I mean, it seems like that you could get that information based on the value of the property if it suddenly, you know, jumped up.
Right.
It seems like.
I think we beat this to death. You guys, finally moving on. I want to thank you guys for coming in. I got some of my answers answered. Again, I'm not sure I'm happy with it, but hey.
But you're only one vote.
That's right, I'm only one vote. But I'll tell you right up front anyways. Thank you guys again very much.
You're welcome.
And you guys do,
Thanks, we try hard.
you guys work a lot of hours, believe me, I know. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks. We're gonna move on to the next thing, the communication committee policy and charter.
Thank you.
Again,
A while back, you were operating under a newsletter policy. It was something that I said, I will update that.
No,
Of course, I'm sure that I realized that it was more than just newsletter issues involved in communications. Because essentially, that was the particular policy. So what I tried to develop was a comprehensive communication policy, and that's before you. But before we go there, in doing that, a young lady came forward to the board, recommended that perhaps we might want to develop a communications committee that will better improve our outreach capabilities to our citizens. And the board entertained that idea, and I said I would draft up a charter. The board said, yes, draft up a charter. We'll try this for 6 months or so, and if it works, it's great. And if it doesn't, then we can always pull back on it. So I developed a charter, it's before you. It involves a committee of 5 to 7 members. I've been working with 4 people, including Regina Copens, who's kind of the acting chair right now. And over the last several months, and I can tell you that the input that we've had from the folks that were on that committee, and especially Regina, has really enabled our last newsletter. I have had several positive comments about that. And that's not including all the recommendations, because we're operating under the time and all of that with the newsletter. So I think there's a tremendous benefit to charting this organization. It's kind of a flexible kind of a charter. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about soon, tomorrow night, if I'm not mistaken, will be the website, because as you all are aware, and I'm pretty much aware, the website is in need of some revision, and so we want to look at that, see what we can do to enhance that, provide better communications back and forth between citizens. So with that, the charter's here. I would recommend that you adopt it. It's fairly straightforward.
Is the charter just this one page or?
It's just that one page.
Okay.
I can change typo. Did I miss? Well, when you do spell check that.
Mike's got a,
I have comments on this.
which page you want?
Page 1.
Are you on the charter?
Charter. Page 1A. 5 to 7 members, which is it? Why don't we say it's gonna be 5 or it's gonna be 7?
We could do that, it just provides flexibility within the board if you don't get 7 members, you know.
Well, then you'll have 2 vacancies.
It's a fair point, we'll have 7 members.
Right. Well, you can have 5, I don't care, just which is it?
No, I think 7 is, I think we need more.
I think the term should be defined. We don't have any committees where they were just in their seats forever, except maybe
We
the
can define them,
Lois.
we can define them if you want.
Yes, I think we should, 3 years is the
Three-year
general.
terms, okay.
Yeah. And also, can they be more than one term consecutively, or just one term?
I would say, I would assume, like many of our committees, that we would authorize people to serve as many terms as they want, if there are other people willing to serve. But if you want two terms, that's fine, we'll put that in.
2 terms.
Well, I mean, this is all for the board, this is not one person now, you guys got to vote on
I
it.
realize that, but these are my suggestions. B, either full-time or summer residents. I'm glad that we recognize the summer residents, but I believe the majority of the members should be full-time residents.
That's fine.
Good.
And should we have a summer residents or seasonal residents? Because some folks come from
Yeah, maybe here in the winter.
October, you know?
Yeah, okay, well, that would make sense, seasonal. But the point is that they're not here all year long, and if we need them and make decisions in October or December. Anyway, I don't want to beat that to death. C. Board of Selectmen appointed by the Board of Select Persons after the committee chair has reviewed. I think the recommendation should come from the chair and the committee. The chair of most committees usually has to have the backing of the committee before they go public with it. So it should be insert chair and committee.
Fine with me?
Good, thank you. That's all I've got until we get to the next document. Thank you. Listen to it.
Emily?
Just a quick, under A, it should read, the chairperson will make every effort to accommodate those who want to serve.
Of course. That's what's
Not to make every,
spell check.
Those that are not.
Anybody else? So, what Mary's got to do?
I just want to make a point that, you know, and the board can do what they want to do, but consistently, all boards and committees for the town of Belgrade are 3-year terms. There's no limitations. The only committee that has limitations is the library committee. And the tracking for future, to stay on a 3-year term, would be more consistent and provide continuity of what's currently been done with all the boards and committees. So, I mean, it's just a point I'm making.
Mike?
I guess I could go along with that. If they want to go to another term, they'd have to be reappointed. And if the select board, you know, if for some reason they felt they wanted to go on or somebody else should be on, they can turn that. We routinely don't turn down people who want to come on committees.
It's hard enough to get people.
Yeah.
I realize that.
But Mary makes a fair point, because in fact, every time the term is up, we bring in for reappointment.
I don't think we'd have to. If we're appointing these people.
I'm just
There are
saying, if
3-year
you have a
terms.
situation where people do,
No, I get it.
miracle
Not
situation where
turn
people
over
are clamoring to be on this committee.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have some of the committees, such as the library, where they have too many terms, in my opinion. They should be limited to fewer terms. But anyway, I don't want to go into the library, especially when voices here.
Let's start with this first recommendation, is the 3 years. Is that what we want to do?
Sure.
All in favor of that? Okay. Gonna put the 3 years in the end?
How about the number of members?
Oh, yeah, yeah, I forgot that. You're gonna go 7 members?
Well, we have a suggestion on the, just as a point for discussion, could it potentially be 5 full-time residents of the town of Belgrade and 2 flexible positions that can be filled by seasonal residents?
So
Then
another
you-
7, 2 of them would be.
Then you have solid,
Alternates, kind
yeah.
of.
We wouldn't be alternate.
Aren't you getting a little bit too prescriptive, though? I mean, this is a committee that you want to encourage people to participate in,
Anybody.
and I don't know, I just always have a problem with things being a little bit too prescriptive.
Well, we've had in the past, Kathy, where we didn't, sorry. Where
Go
we
ahead,
didn't
just
allow,
have to-
where we didn't allow folks that were seasonal residents to be
I
part of the
understand it.
committee.
I understand
So
that.
this is making a provision that is not with CA and other committees in the town to allow folks to
Well,
also have say.
it sort of says it here, that they can be either full-time or seasonal residents of the town of Belgrade, so it
But
seemed to be covering it.
But I think my point of putting some sort of parameters around it is you don't necessarily want 5 seasonal residents and 2 people who are full-time residents, because then when things maybe need to be discussed.
I understand what you're saying.
That's why I suggested the majority would be full-time residents.
So 5 and 2.
You guys fine with that 5 and 2?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. 5 regular, 2 seasonal. Okay, the term limit, are we 3?
Yeah, 3 years.
Oh, we did, yeah, but you can only run 2 terms. We got,
No,
They,
back off on
let's
it.
do away with that.
Mike is backed off
Well,
based on their.
okay, that's gone.
He's still married, don't wanna fight but marry.
And under B,
But you're gonna have a 3-year term.
Right.
yeah, we got the 3-year term. And we're gonna change that for some of the seasonal.
Yeah, I think so. Then I'll bring it back.
Was there anything else we needed to change?
Nothing's gonna be-
And you're gonna do all that and then bring it back, right?
It's for signature.
Under C, if we do, under B, there's nothing else, but under C, I had suggested that it be
And committee.
Okay.
Committee
Yeah,
chair
I didn't
and
put that
committee.
down. And the committee. You guys fine with that?
Yep.
Okay. Anything else?
I'm curious to know how Regina feels about it.
That all sounds good to me.
Okay.
I think it would be a good thing to have some people from the summer resident community on the communications. Maybe see what they'd like to see in the newsletters and on the website.
All right, I guess I'd entertain a vote on this, but we won't be able to sign it until the next meeting. We're gonna, I mean, not a vote. Motion?
Motion to approve it as
Yeah.
amended?
Yeah.
I'll make it.
Okay, move to second. Any more discussion on this? Jack?
There's a question, will there be any budgetary issues associated with this that need to be considered in the next go-around, or will it cost, any costs, if any, will be within the administrative budget?
We're working within the current money for the newsletter and all that. We would, if we needed to do something extra and it required more money, I'd probably ask for approval, or we'd expand the next year's budget. But the website, we know, will, if we're going to do anything with that, we know we're going to need some money, and I don't know how we'll address that, but it may be through the next town meeting vote, or whether or not the board will authorize some expenditure.
Is that okay? Okay. You guys ready to vote?
Sure.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
I'm afraid even to look at this.
I've got comments on every page, so you want to table it?
No, I don't want to, unless we need to go through it, because if you have comments.
Comments or questions, and I will, other than just questions, what is this one? Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, policy statement, number 2. What does that mean? Consult and inform all stakeholders when establishing and developing the priorities for
Whenever the town is considering policy development or a priority issue or whatever, I believe we had intended for this to be able to say, provide advance notice of that. Let people know what was going on, rather than say, oh, we voted on, but provide people an opportunity to understand what we may as a town be considering.
Who would be just developing the priorities, policies?
Would be the board?
This board?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I mean, you guys.
Well, I wasn't sure if that was the communications.
No.
Committee, yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's a general communication policy.
Okay, 3, anticipate the needs of the community, select board, board of select persons and others for timely and relevant. That's the same. Same deal. Okay, thank you. Internal inquiries. I'm trying to think about why I
Internal, where's that?
Internal or external?
Oh, external, excuse me. I got them in the internal too. I highlighted variety of formats, I'm not sure what town also. In a variety of what is that? Is that
Where you,
First
first paragraph? Be available to the public in a variety of formats. Does that mean,
website, Facebook, newsletter, even the LED sign if there's some notice or something.
okay, does that mean under FOA, if you come in and you want a copy of our minutes, for instance, you can have a tape, but we're not gonna change that to satisfy the request. That doesn't mean somebody come in and say, no, I want it in a different format, does it? I
No,
want it in a different
that's-
format other than one you're offering.
No, those are formats that we would make
Only
information
use it.
available.
Okay, thank you.
In the website as the tape conversations, or should have,
Okay.
not conversations, board meetings.
Next, guidelines in dealing for general external inquiries include information is provided to the public, trained, knowledgeable staff, services timely and courteous. That should all be in conformance with the FOA guideline, what the FOA allows, is it?
This is intended to ensure what we're expecting from our staff, that we're gonna provide knowledgeable, we're gonna have staff that are knowledgeable in what they're saying, so we can provide accurate information and all of that. I don't know how that intertwines with FOIA. Other than
Well-
FOIA provides a certain process that you have to provide information to people. And if people are asking, or FOIA, FOAA us. If they're requesting freedom of information under the Freedom of Access law, then we have a standard process we're required to follow, and we have a FOIA officer, but that's me. Or it is me.
Number 5, on a major new policy, it just struck me that it says the town's website and the town newsletter. The newsletter comes out, it comes out three times a year or 4 times?
3 times a year right
If the timing isn't right, this stuff is not going to get in the newsletter. If what they're referring to is developed after the newsletter is out, it'll have to go to the
now.
next
As an
newsletter.
informational, right.
Okay,
But,
could be a delay.
well, in the newsletter, that would be more developed information. The website and the Facebook would certainly put that information out. And there's always the authority for the board to say, hey, this is so important, we have to get it out in print, so you can authorize another newsletter.
All right, next section, it speaks of the town manager being chief spokesman regarding policy and so forth. It seems to me that the chair of the board of selectmen should.
Which one is that?
Item 1B, A and B.
Under
Actually, C, that under, the next one down.
external, where?
It's under
It's
external.
media inquiries.
Matters that pertain to board matters should be the chairman of the board, should be the spokesman. He may delegate it, he or she may delegate it to the town manager, but
But I think that in fact is what this is implying, and maybe it's not elegantly worded, but it says the town manager is the chief spokesman regarding policy prior to decision unless the chairman of the board or another board member is specifically designated. Now,
well,
that may be an artful way of saying that, but generally, my experience has been that the town manager is the first person called, and then I would obviously provide what information I had available and let the board chair know what's going on. Generally, when you're going to the town, when someone's calling, unless they are calling you directly. But if you want that changed, it's fine with me, I have no problem with it. Them calling the board chair and having that.
if the board's happy with it, we'll just go on with it.
Hope we don't get into that.
Down to 3, formal inquiries. You must, if citizens requesting action from a municipality or wish to ensure communication is addressed formally by the entire board, they must submit their inquiry in writing or request in writing. You mean if I'm talking to my neighbor and he says we ought to do such and such, and I say, okay, I'll get it on the agenda, that
No,
can't,
what I'm talking about here is if someone comes here to me and says, I need X to be on the next board agenda. The board has asked me that, sometimes I fail to do it. The board has asked me for at least a description of the type of information that's gonna be
Yes.
discussed. That's what that's getting at.
well, if I want something on the agenda, I should
You have
that
the
same-
authority to do it.
I realize, but I should have that same requirement, I should give you a paragraph or a couple of sentences anyway describing what it is I'm looking for.
The board has the authority to put anything on the agenda, any board member has. that authority.
You're not hearing what I'm saying, that's all
Well,
right.
maybe,
All right,
we can talk about it,
well, let us see how it works out.
yeah.
If it doesn't work out, we'll,
Doesn't any citizen really have the right to step forward and have something put on the board?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is they have to describe it.
Right,
They have to put it in writing,
yep,
so that I know, the board will know what they're asking.
right.
informal inquiries. Somewhere in here it says that if we have an informal inquiry, we're supposed to report on that. But, you know, some of these informal inquiries are really informal. So
You know, that
if I don't,
not
if
informal.
6 months from now, if somebody comes back and says, you didn't tell me about such and such, I'm not gonna beat
No,
right
the purpose here is to ensure that the town office understands, so that if there's another question that comes up and a board member asks or something like that, I have the information,
Thank you.
or we have the information, we don't have.
I will just, I do have some external, but I'm just gonna say my only concern is basically to keep the board in the loop.
Oh, absolutely.
Doesn't read that way in some of these things, but I don't wanna belabor it anymore.
We could modify that.
So you want me to go through everything now?
No, only if you want to.
No.
Or if they're non-substantive and you wanna talk to me on the side, we can talk on the side, you can provide it. If they're substantive, I think the board should hear it.
At no time,
Where are we at? Page-
internal communication. At no time should a member of the board of select persons direct operation, that's straightforward. Direct operations or employee, they don't work for us, we know that, we've talked about that. Does that have to be in a communications policy?
No, it's,
I mean, whether it's there or not, and I go down to the transfer station, start telling Kenny what to do.
what paragraph, what,
Internal communication,
1, 2,
D,
3?
2D.
Yeah, you're not. That was on the wrong page.
Okay.
I mean,
We can pull it out, I mean, that's an understood thing, we can pull it out.
Well, my only feeling about this thing is too long to begin with, so I can pull the sentence out.
Of course, covering a lot of areas.
I know it is.
That's exactly what I told him today. I said, this, you know how I like policies? This is way too
Yeah,
long.
put it on 1 page.
So we went
We can shut the door.
about on this a few times before we.
We communicated, come on.
In fact, you can see like crossed out, I realized that was. Excluded content. I just thought there was a conflict between what's said in the first paragraph where it says promotion or advertising business specialty. Not approved by the town manager is in conflict with what it says about organizations give residents the opportunity to publish information regarding government, community items.
So it's under excluded content.
I may be wrong, but it just struck me as being those two statements were in conflict with each other.
What's in conflict with these statements?
Promotion, okay, up top, in the second,
Second bullet down,
Bullet
is promotion or advertisement, that's excluded,
yeah,
unless they're approved by the town manager, so that's an excluded content. In other words, for-profit organizations must have a particular interest, issue that's acceptable.
as long as you're happy with
And
it.
then the political organizations, we just don't want political organizations in our newsletter advocating position, because that's not what that's for. And I thought that was, I think that's part of the past policy.
Information, excluded information on corporate or other for-profit organizations.
Yeah, for-profit.
And any submission that the town manager deems appropriate or out of line with the purpose and goal.
Right.
That's awfully subjective.
It's a pretty subjective, but it gives me the,
You know, what you said there is exactly what I'm thinking. I don't have a problem with you, Denny, but I don't know who's gonna be here next time.
I don't know either. All
I
I'm
know
saying is this
that.
gives any town manager the ability to look at something and say, you know, it's not covered, but, that's all that's trying to say.
Okay, when did we change the name of the newsletter to the Belgrade Bulletin, or has it always been that?
I think it is Belgrade Bolton since I've been here.
Is it?
Yeah, I
No,
think that,
it's the Town of Belgrade newsletter.
That's what I thought.
oh, I thought there was a document we saw that said Belgrade Bolton, or was I reading my own policy too many times?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess that's a suggested name. I'm sorry about that, I did not highlight that. I read through it. Remember we talked?
Yeah.
Okay, now an easy one, there's a typo where it says any ballot questions that are going before the ballot would be,
Yeah,
F, take the F out. Get the F out of there.
Spell check didn't pick it up, there must be a bill
Well,
somewhere.
there's an extra letter inserted, and it happens to be an F. Okay. All right, only organizations or nonprofits other than Belgrade can submit articles for public. Does that include the ads, the advertisements?
Let me see what you're saying, where are you at?
On the next page, about midway down, where my question mark is.
Just about.
Yeah.
It's right below
No,
that
that's,
list.
no, that's only organization that can submit articles for publication.
Okay, so it doesn't include the ads. then.
Yeah.
You see the typo right after that, Mike?
Yeah, down below, media.
And
I do see one in the internet.
I'm not
The
stating.
plural of media, the plural of medium is media, not mediums.
Where am I?
Where you at?
Guidelines. Internet and electronic communication guidelines for the use of internet and electronic mediums, it says.
Oh, maybe there's a medium in there too. You know, like a woo-woo kind of thing.
Okay.
Can I just, while we're on that same page, Mike, can I just bump
Certainly,
in?
go ahead, please.
That same line where it says only organizations or nonprofits within, well, it says within the Belgrade,
Oh, yeah,
should say within Belgrade,
yeah.
can submit articles for publication in the newsletter. All articles must be factual and not on statement of opinions.
I saw that.
So it should just be statement and flip those around.
Well, I missed it.
So I feel like we're in a wordsmithing class.
Well, we are, it's gonna be a public
It's
document.
gonna be exactly a permanent document, so it should.
We
not
just
make
keep
us
sending
look
it back
like
until he
fools.
gets it right.
And on, yeah, that's right, just send it back and bring it. Should not be statements of opinion, so if the friends of the library want to submit an article saying, no, I'll be here all night if you don't stop laughing.
I'm not laughing.
No, you're not. Anyway, so if the Friends of the Library want to submit an article advocating not using the backyard for some reason, they can't express an opinion as to say why they're against that. I just pulled that out of the air as an example.
I guess you did.
Well, all right.
Wow, you had me scared for a minute.
If the Recreation Committee, all right, takes
Oh,
on
yeah.
all right, they want to convince the town they should have a tennis court. They can't, how do they do that without expressing an opinion?
Well,
My suggestion would be a letter to the editor, because as we've seen in the newsletter in the past, when there has been someone who used it as a way to express their personal opinion, because it was going out to all the households in Belgrade, there were a good number of us in Belgrade who thought that was not okay for them for that to be done. So
Well,
if
if
you
it's
wish.
the one you're thinking, if you're thinking of the one I am too, I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
But when a committee has to make any recommendation, just the fact that it's a recommendation is an opinion. Maybe wordsmithing too much.
well, here's what I'd say about that, right? What we're trying to do is have this be factual, providing factual communications to the citizens without providing an opportunity for someone expressing pros, cons, because then you start, but once you could go out and say, the town of Belgrade has a warrant article that was submitted by the Board of Parks and Recs that is requested that a no smoking policy be put in place, something factual like that. And then all of the advocacy, pro and con, can take place at council. I think that's the effort. Now, again, it could be inartfully worded, but that's, I think, what we were trying to get at there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then finally, electronic message sign release form, that looked good, I didn't have any problem with that.
Okay.
I'm
You
done.
did what?
It was fine.
Oh,
I think I had to find something that was good.
Well, I did
She
put
does.
beside that RSU 18. Would they be able to, the town's messaging LED sign, if RSU 18 had information that they wanted to get out, would we allow them to use the sign as
approved by
well?
the town meeting.
If it's factual.
Right,
It's other
specifically
organizations.
approved, but,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what's good.
Yeah, not now.
That's what, I mean, we can,
well, that's okay, I just, you know, I put that there as.
we tried to cover that, but, yeah.
I don't wanna get it wrong, yeah, I mean, I think this whole idea of this is excellent. I appreciate what the committee has done, what you've done, Jenny, it's just, there were some things in there that could bite us later on, that's all.
Hey, I have not taken this negatively at all. It's all
Okay,
fine.
good,
All
good.
right, if we bump that 2 pages.
At least you know I read it.
Where the head excluded contact is the first bold header, and under newsletter,
Newsletter.
so under newsletter, it's kind of wordy how, you know, the way it reads, but, so I put a question mark, it says, the primary purpose of the town's newsletter, the Belgrade Bulletin, is to promote community and economic development by providing the town, its employees, community organizations, and I think they mean and residents,
Yes.
an opportunity to publish information regarding governmental and community items of general public interest.
Right.
Does that,
Yeah.
okay. I was kind of like, I had it in parentheses, and I was like, are we giving residents
No,
a
no, no, no,
chance to
that, those two,
publish
to give,
something
no.
in the newsletter? Or would
It's to
we?
promote community and economic development, by providing the town with employees, community organizations, and residents. There are people that, you know, the Belgrade Historical Society can publish something, provide information, but, you know, so that's an organization, so,
Well, I'm wondering the residents part of that, was that where we were leaning with the Belgrade newsletter? You know, I mean, if I wanted to say, hey, yard sale Belgrade means whatever.
oh,
you
no,
know,
no, 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 no. That's not-
You know,
Yeah.
That's what I'm wondering, if
Maybe we
if
should just
the
say-
intention of that was in the newsletter,
No.
or if we're intending with
That's-
another form of communication like Facebook, you know, the town of Belgrade's Facebook thing, that you could do bake sale at, you know.
No, actually, this is,
Central for
this,
whatever.
and residents should be
Scratch.
scratched, and it
Yeah.
should be, its employees and community organizations an opportunity. What we're trying to say that was, again, it was probably wordsmithing, and we got caught up in words. We want to give residents information, basically.
Community organizations.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, well,
That's
that's
why
why,
the two
that's why I
pages-
put a question mark, because I was like, well, I don't know that we just
Well,
want
that's okay.
everybody putting stuff in the newsletter.
Anything else?
Basically, it's a publication of the town, the
Right.
select board, the committees, to give information to general citizens about what goes on.
Issues of importance,
Yeah,
of public interest.
you know, and factual kind of stuff, and,
It's
not
a push out,
opinionated.
not a come in
Yeah.
and push out.
right, it's not a newspaper.
That's all I had.
I just want to say, you know, one of the things we talked about, you know, in terms of like, you know, we're soliciting content from residents, but we do want input from people in the town, what they would like to see in the newsletter, what's important to them.
That's what the committee would.
So, including the board and other committees in the town. You know, we want to make it so that it's newsy and current and information that people are really need to know, not just boilerplate from issue to
Right.
issue.
The only question I have is, does the Belgrade Bulletin fit, or do you want to leave the naming up to the?
Should be up to the committee, I guess,
No.
seems to me.
Come
I
back
think we
with a
should
name.
stick with the name we've always had.
Well, I think Belgrade Bullet was the name that apparently we came up with, and I kind of destroyed the concept. Per se.
You guys happy with that?
No, I think we should keep the name we've always had,
What is it?
Belgrade Newsletter.
What's the matter, you against change?
We wanted something a little catchy.
Are you against
I'm only
change?
one vote.
But that's the way we've always done it.
What, Belgrade Newsletter?
Go to your room.
I don't care. That's,
I really don't.
well, I gotta go to chair into this Parks and Recreation.
We need to go back and decide what we're gonna do on this. Are we making, what changes are we gonna make?
Would you approve it as amended? And I'll be bringing back a copy of file.
And you're gonna get rid of that?
I feel more comfortable, you know, that's very nice to say and everything, but I feel more comfortable seeing a finished document.
Okay,
And then whether or not we approve.
we have to go through
A
this.
finished document.
Yeah, we had to go through this in any case.
Then if that's the case, I would entertain a motion to table this.
It would, I make that motion.
Very good.
And moved and seconded. Any
Yes,
more
sir.
discussion on this? I
No
hate-
discussion on the table.
I know, I hate to.
No discussion on the table.
I know.
Table, vote, done.
Table's where I eat. You shut and be quiet. All right, I'd entertain a vote. All in favor?
Amen.
Thank you.
Could've done this half an
I'm gonna
hour.
get a chair trade.
Yeah, just gone right to my head. All right, let's get on to the next thing. See, we're gonna spend a bunch of hours doing that. The Board of Recreation, roles and responsibility. This ought to be good.
Okay. Who's gonna take the roles and responsibilities?
What do you mean?
The document changes in roles and responsibilities. You want me to go through that?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Can I just ask, what
Sure.
items in dark print, in the, are they changes? For instance, the first one down.
Underlined ones.
Only underlined, so the fact that it says Recreation Committee in dark print, that doesn't mean that's what it says, that's what it says now.
Right.
Good.
Let's move change that. I didn't see that.
Okay. I just.
I don't see anything
Watch the
underlined.
wire, watch the wire.
You said in 1993, the select persons changed the title. You actually changed the title.
That's
In 1993.
It's always been, that's what
Yes.
it was. You can be accused.
It almost looks like maybe it was like folded instead of.
Well, I think it was,
Okay, well, that's what I asked, is it just meant to be a proposed change, or is it in effect now?
yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
talk.
Just like the day of the week that the meeting is was changed.
Sure. So,
Linda Bacon is the, is on the board.
Well,
She's
I'm
going
not
to.
sure what I am now, but,
We're gonna tell you.
we went through this last fall at Denny's request, and on the third page, you'll see the first change. There's horizontal, vertical lines on the left-hand column wherever there has been a change.
Thank you.
Well, it was
Write a
in,
five-year plan in 2011 and revise annually. It doesn't make any sense to have a particular year referenced, write a five-year plan and revise annually. We did such a thing in 2011, and we should be doing it every revising it every year. Next one, for membership, next page, about halfway down, there's another vertical line. Upon being sworn in, new board members will be provided copies of related policies, fee structures, and expectations, that just an addition. Under leadership, a chairperson, vice chairperson, or two co-chairpersons, and secretary shall be elected annually by the board. So the addition is or two co-chairpersons. Under 6 meetings, the board will meet once a month on an established day/time period. It was written down, in the policy, the second Wednesday of the month, and that does not allow for any flexibility based on schedules of the people in the BPR. Being locked into one particular day rather than having a pre-established day and time, just is kind of limiting.
fall on a holiday, then we work on the following week. And
Fine.
scratch Wednesday, because if we're not gonna walk us into the second Wednesday of every month, then we don't get in. Let's see. Next page, top, last sentence of the paragraph that expands it, policy shall be reviewed as needed.
Yep.
Sometimes they don't really need anything, and then there's all kinds of things that need to be changed under the approval, because in 2010, we had
Different board.
many different board members. There are a few that are either back or still there, but not many.
So those are the changes to the roles and responsibilities of Parks and Recs.
So we just need to
Any
approve
questions
those?
on that?
They were relatively minor.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
Under leadership, why do you need two co-chairs?
If I,
So, I've been chair for a while, and we voted that Valencia would be chair. There was a little bit of concern expressed on Denny's part that because the center director is the daughter of Valencia, that when it came time to do performance evaluations, there might be the perception of,
well,
what's the word?
my
I'm missing the word.
my concern was that there might be a perception that,
So,
because as town manager, I'll go to the board and ask, how's the rec department director doing? You know, I'll have my own observations, I want input, like I do with most boards and committees, I'll have input on people. So, the concern I had was if Valencia was chair, then there might be that perception out there that Valencia might, or the board might, whatever, give me information that might not be reflective,
Might be biased.
but might be biased. So that was the only concern I raised to the, and to me, it seems like sometimes you can get people to chair a committee if there's, I mean, the way I was looking at it, sometimes if you share responsibility, it's easier to get people to participate than not. So I saw that as one of the reasons. And, you know, that was my concern.
If that's the only reason, you know, what I'm concerned about is other things. Who's in charge? You know, for other things. Who's in charge if you got two co-chairs? You got two chairpersons.
I'm just gonna say on the part of being in committees all my life, that it's great to have a shared responsibility. There's no need for one person to be in charge. We would, any other time I've been a co-chair with anyone, we've taken turns speaking in public, we've taken turns, I can't make it on Tuesday night, can you? It lightens the load.
Why don't you have a vice chair then?
I have a question.
So that's what we
They
have
have higher
now,
roles,
and
I guess what it's-
we're just giving Linda a little relief, is what this was. There was no, please put me on the top, request from me. It was, more of a request on Linda's end of somebody else.
no, it was at the town meeting, it was time to do the.
Time to do that, and
And we have a.
I don't agree with it.
Okay, no, that's fine. Ernie?
Well, my point with that is that it sounds to me like right now, under the current situation, the Recreation Committee might choose to have two co-chairs, but in the future, they would be the ones that would be voting for chair, vice chair, two co-chairs, whatever works for them. And this just gives them flexibility in this current state, which is fine with me. You know, I'll agree with Michael that maybe it's not normal. I mean, like, this board probably wouldn't work well with two co-chairs, but that's why we have a chair and a vice chair, and it just seems to make sense on this board.
We don't have that kind of power.
Yeah, so I just think it's flexibility for your board, and so I would go with it.
Anybody else? Seeing none, I would entertain a vote. I mean, a motion, Jesus.
I'll I'll make the motion, we accept this with the amendments that are noted.
Second?
And moved and seconded. Any more discussion on this? No? I will entertain a vote. All in favor? All opposed? 4 for, 1 against. Thank you.
Oh,
Did you have something else?
just on the signature page, policies are,
Gotta be changed.
the policies are approved by the select board. Why do we need the Parks and Recreation signatures at all?
Well, I think that's why they're all deleted. It says Board of Select Persons, we gotta put those in.
No, I think it's.
Oh, wait a minute, there was two columns, I see what you're
Yeah.
saying.
In 2010, everybody signed.
It's 2010, it's not 2010 anymore. But the point is, we make the policies, we approve the policies. You don't, you recommend them to us.
Right, and I think that maybe they, I can't remember why, but maybe that's an indication that the board is recommending this policy. It says the board members on that Parks and Rec signed off on it.
Take it out,
Until it's approved by the board, then it's not a policy.
until it's approved by us.
By the board.
Well, it says board, the word board is used interchangeably.
I understand, but the board of Parks and Rec signs off on it and said, and then that's an indication of the board of Parks and Rec's recognition that everyone agrees to that, and then it's submitted to the board of select persons to sign off on it for final approval. I think that that's what that's intended to be. It's an indication to the board of select persons that the board of Parks and Rec is submitting this and it has their approval.
So when the chair, or his chairs, comes and make a recommendation, don't we assume that the,
Really, it's not an issue for me. I'm just trying to explain why it was that way in 2010.
One point I had is if you wanted to, you could have two separate sections, and you could have the Board of the Parks and Recreation that accept and recommend, and then have another section of approval where the Board of Selection persons is there. If you'd like to do it that way, good.
whatever?
Moving right along. Mr. Chair.
Yes. Well, what are we gonna do on that? That came back up again here. Are we gonna go with just the board signature on there, or we're gonna go with Parks and Recreation signatures too? We need to decide that, I guess, right now. Before we do.
I move that we strike the recreation board signatures.
Okay? I'll second that, see where it goes.
Fine with me.
That's fine.
Sure. Okay. We,
All right, so we move the second in.
Yep.
We're gonna strike the Board of Appeals signatures on,
It's the Parks and Recreation board.
I'm sorry, back to you. I'm sorry.
We get the board of appeals later.
Yeah, Board of Appeals. All right, so it's just gonna be the board to select people sign this. Okay, that's what we're voting on. All in favor?
Yep.
5-0. Thank you. Oh, we've got one more, thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to the next one.
The other issue that the Board of Parks and Rec brought forward, the Board of Parks and Rec voted to ask the select board to waive or defray cost of childcare for center employees.
Do we miss the alcohol policy?
Oh, I thought we,
That's
No,
later.
this one comes before alcohol
Oh,
policy.
this one's before
Yeah,
alcohol.
it's before.
Gotcha.
only center employees because the parent is on site. And so they asked that this be put on the select person's agenda. I had a question on that only because, in the board, I'm sure can waive this, it's not an issue that is absolute, but we had a personnel issue back when someone was not paying that fee because they were an employee. And we also have section 5 of the public and employee relations general policy, relations with the public, where it says employees are prohibited from engaging in any conduct that could reflect unfavorably on the town or disrupt efficient municipal operations. Town employees must avoid any action or conduct that might result or create the impression of using public employment for private gain, giving the proper, so that's that particular section. And so I just raised that as an issue. It's not a huge issue for me. I think the board is, the Park and Recs is basically saying, Board of Select Persons, can you authorize the forgiveness of the cost of childcare for those employees that are working there? Which, if you do, then this policy is still okay. It's just, I raised it.
Melanie?
I guess right off the top of my head, there's a couple of things that pop right out. One would be that other employees of the town who might potentially like to have their child be able to use the, say, one of the summer camps or, use the summer programming, but because they don't actually work at the center, would be prohibited from having this be a benefit to them. And it would be considered a benefit because there's a monetary cost that would be waived. So that's number one. Number two is that as a parent, if my child is on premises and my child is injured, it would be in my nature to go and assist my child and maybe not be fully engaged in what my responsibilities were when my child was injured. So rather the attention of the employee will be split between that of being a parent and being an employee.
Are you prohibiting?
Right, that's what I
child
get from that.
attending if the parent works there then? I mean, is that what you're thinking?
No.
That's what you're kind of saying.
Well, that wasn't what my intention was.
Okay, good.
Mike, go ahead.
No, I had the same feeling on the other employees, but as far as the second situation you're describing, that could be a problem, but I've got to believe that there's a way that you guys, other people that could cover the injured parties so that it doesn't become a problem. You have other people working there.
Right.
So if Melanie's child, well, let's use Melanie as an example, her child is injured, so she has to go away, has to neglect her regular duties, somebody would cover for her. So that shouldn't be a problem.
That have nothing to do with cost. That's a totally separate issue. Whether you're paying for your child to be there or not doesn't change the fact that if your child was there and injured, you would react as a parent.
Yeah.
Right.
It has nothing to do with whether I'm paying for the child care or not.
I only bring it up because I only make my comment because it was brought up, and I just think that would be covered. So-
But I also think that if you were paying for your child to go elsewhere versus your child being able to go there at no cost, there's a difference there. If you're more inclined to have your child there, I totally have my kid with me all the time, it's just too much, but.
I think that's the idea of what the proposal.
Right.
Is this because you've got somebody that wants to come to work there?
It's somebody who's been hired, whose child has been attended.
And I brought this to the Board of Parks and Rec with no influence, never mentioned, I wasn't part of the hiring or anything. I just know from past experience as the rec director that folks that work for the town of Belgrade receive limited pay, and that this would be a wonderful benefit to be able to encourage more qualified people occasionally, and not force people to look elsewhere once they've received a job with the town. It is a benefit, definitely a benefit, and it doesn't take away really from the town, I don't think.
It doesn't say town of Belgrade employees, it says only center employees, so it only
Right.
affects folks who.
And part of that was because the parent was on the premises and the wording, I guess, was intended to make it easier for the select board to understand where they were coming from.
Well, I guess the real question is, do you want to does the board, I guess the question, direct question to the board is, do you want to add a benefit to an employee or employees who work at the site, nowhere else, to have their childcare expenses if they're participating in that childcare as an employee? Is that fair?
I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about it. How much money are we talking about for a kid in childcare on an annual basis?
How many employees do you have with children?
Daily rate.
Well, after school, just the 2 hours is $10 a day for a Belgrade resident. And then summer camp for a week is $85.
So figure that out for me.
Well, depending on-
Depends on how many days.
Right, we're not like a normal daycare, they charge by the week, except for camp. But even then, we do a daily rate too.
My question would be, if you were an employee who didn't have children, and this benefit was being given in lieu of money, would it be then discriminatory not to offer a monetary benefit to those folks who didn't have children? Or who weren't taking advantage of the benefit?
In similar fashion, the way we give them monetary, give money back if somebody doesn't take the insurance.
Right. So would be, well, if I don't take the childcare, then you technically owe me, I could potentially utilize this for $10 a day for every day after school, blah, blah, blah. So essentially the town would owe those employees money that was not part of their pay.
I think the real intent is to cover a certain situation. I think that's the intent. And, I mean, I'm not
Right. We'll totally get the
disputing
intent,
at all.
and look at all the pieces around it.
Exactly, right. And I think that these are other issues that are.
You may be talking about a significant policy based on intent for one individual. I don't know. See, I don't know the whole story. I don't feel like I know the whole story.
No, it was truly on my part, hoping to help people that work at the center, and I'm selfish that way. Can't help it.
And this is not the first time this has come up?
I just know that it would have been helpful in the past, for employees. And it's, because the state has rising minimum wage, it's helpful for those folks that have to come in at that wage, so, that are trying to support families.
Well, I think the issue Melanie raises is correct. If we're gonna do it, we can do it for one town, or we should do it for all of them. I don't know if we can afford to do it for all of them.
And that, maybe that stinks, and we're limited to a parent. We know folks in town who the grandparent is the custodial parent or a foster parent. It opens up a bigger can of worms. I think ideally it is, it's ideal.
I wonder how many, if you open it up to the employees of the town of Belgrade, what kind of an impact would that potentially have?
Well,
The question of fairness is a real one, but the question of what would it cost us to provide that as another little incentive when we're looking for employees?
Well, if I can simply say, you said $10 a day for after-school kind of thing, if you're talking about, even a year's worth of that, you're talking about $2,600, and that's not summer, that's one individual with one child, so I don't know if you were, try to answer your question. I have no idea how many town employees would have kids in that age range.
I'm gonna speak first for a second. I'm gonna bite my tongue off if I don't.
Go ahead.
I think that's a great idea, but I'm not sure I can support that after what had happened years ago. With the same, I think we're opening up a can of worms, and I would not vote for it.
And that's totally why
You
we
brought
had
it
it put
in. I know.
here and we did it this way, was because it's, everything
I'm just-
wanted to be on the table.
I'm just a little leery about if we did it now, why didn't we do it then? And, you know, that may come up, that's my question.
Because we're gonna learn some.
Let me get Mike and then I'll get you.
Quick one, you willing to pay for it out of your budget, Lily?
Out of my budget.
We haven't looked at it
Yeah,
that way.
I haven't looked at it.
Well, maybe you should.
Would there be an age stipulation? Because I can imagine if the child was very young, that would be very distracting for any employee. So I didn't hear any age.
Right, this would be for, see for like we do kindergarten through fifth grade. That's what we offer. We wouldn't take.
Oh,
any
okay, so
child
you
that
would
we
not take a
don't-
really,
yeah.
really young
No,
child?
we don't.
Go
We're
ahead,
not
Andy.
set up for that.
Well, I guess where I'm heading with this is, this seems to be a change in the wage and benefits package, which is undergoing review. So, and I can certainly look around, see what other communities are doing. I see the potential benefit for employees, and I would waste money. But I also see some of the negatives in terms of costs and stuff. And we haven't looked at that across the town, because I do think if you apply it for, you can't just discriminate and say, only this group. I think you'd have to look at it in a much broader context. So that's
Yeah,
where
and that going on.
I mean, I appreciate the concern, it's just that I'm trying to figure out how this all plays through the wages and benefit package.
Because that is what you're talking about.
Linda?
So, before the consideration is totally closed, we did ask for defray, waive or defray, and perhaps it could apply to somebody working at the center who actually does live in town, which would get around the issue that arose 5 or 6 years ago. I think, you know, there's
But
some
it doesn't get
other
around the
ways
issue of
that
other
could
town
help it.
employees. It doesn't get around the issue of other town employees.
No, but
That may be.
defray the cost could be, okay, instead of $10, you can charge $7.50 or something like that.
Well, that's,
I mean, there's
that's always a
other
possibility.
ways to slice and dice it.
I think,
Ways to give them a
I
raise.
think I'm gonna call for a vote here.
I don't think there's enough information to make.
Well, I'd like that Denny gets more information, but my sister's even gonna be mad at me. She keeps seconding it, but oh well. So I think we need a motion to be made on this. We make it, what do you-
I'll make a vote.
Are we looking for a decision on it tonight, or is this an informational that, you know,
I mean,
this is-
if there's information you want that we can gather on, happy to.
Well, I can tell you, I'm never gonna vote in favor of it unless it includes all employees. And then I'm not sure, like I said before, I don't think we can afford that, unless you've got enough money in your budget that we can take it from there, and that, but that's gonna hurt your other programs.
So, not only that, I don't think that's,
No,
that's a,
probably too late.
I don't think you can do
No,
that.
it's not, it's probably not.
Tonight.
But you see what I'm saying, is that that's the only way I can think of that it won't cost the town
If you
additional.
wanna get some more information, I guess, and then we'll decide then. I guess that's the question.
Can I make a motion that this topic be added to the wage benefit package review in the coming year? And then, you know, we sort of move it to that
Yeah,
stage, and then we,
certainly we'll do that as part of
then we,
it.
you know, when you review it at that time, you can see, well, how much it costs for the employees of the center, how much it costs for all the employees of the town, you know, what the total cost would be. Of course, that would vary from year to year, depending on how many employees we have with children, but,
Well, also, there's also an equity question.
yeah, so
And
then,
that is
you know,
what
then that can be addressed as
Melanie
well
raises.
if we wanted to. Or if we wanted, you know, at that time, when you reviewed it, you could say, well, we'll give each employee, you know, a $500 credit that could be used for that, or could be used for you know, given to employees without children, whatever it might be. But, I mean, let's say I was an employee of the town and I had, you know, 5 6 grandchildren, do my grandchildren, are they, considered, part of this program? Because I don't have children of my own of that age group. These things kind of come up when you start these programs, which could be addressed and could be debated during that review. So, I mean, could we move it to that?
Thank you. Do I hear a second on that?
Yes, I would second that. I think that it needs to be further investigated and, maybe we can come up with something.
Seems to me we either have to vote it up or down or table it.
Well, yeah, we need more information on it, right?
Yeah.
We'll table it.
So I guess if we table it, then you take it under advisement, we can review
I've
it.
got it.
I think that's the cleanest way to do it, as much as I don't like tabling stuff, but.
If you'll withdraw your motion.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Second, withdraw in a second. Okay, I'll move the table.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Second right back.
It's been moved and seconded that we'll table this until we get some more information. I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now we're getting the rules policy, right?
Now we're gonna drink their way down.
And if you didn't like that
The
answer.
next issue is a policy that we've kind of rehashed. We pulled it off with one side last fall, I think, when we were initially discussing this, because there seemed to be some issues that Mike wanted to investigate with me.
Yeah.
We brought it back forward after changes. We made the changes that were discussed at the table, and we're proposing that it be implemented. We can certainly review this on the intent is to review this on a regular basis, or it can be taken out of sequence, at least once every 3 years, like that. It wasn't specified.
I think that would be plenty of time to review these every 3 years, not every year.
Some of them specify, only once.
Well, there may be more than one or two. We spend a lot of time on it, usually.
I have no problem with this.
Anybody got any problems with this? Pretty much been the same right along.
Is this based upon the alcohol policies from the licensing bureau? for,
This is all,
all
it's
that,
gone
yes.
through all this.
So what was changed? What did you?
There was just some wording changes. Do you remember the exact wording changes? No, I don't remember.
All right, whatever.
There were some just minor wording changes. There wasn't anything sensitive.
I want to entertain a motion for this.
I'll make the motion, we
Bob
accept
got a
it.
motion on it. You want to second it?
I move to approve it.
Move to
Okay, I
approve.
move to second that, yes.
Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, I entertain a vote. All in favor? 5-0. Thank you. That was easy. See, I told ya.
Alcohol is always easy.
Yeah.
Benefits everybody.
Yeah.
In fact, it's going to be easier to.
What's the next one we got? Okay.
This is the library hours. As you know, obviously, as you know, the town voted to approve the full-time librarian. The board has proposed
Thank you,
the
ladies.
Thank you,
following
ladies.
library hours, as you can see in the memo. And because the policy says that the board of selectmen has approved the operational hours of the library, it's being presented to you. So
Are you gonna have enough time to do your administration work? That's what I wanna make sure.
I
You
hope
knew-
so, I think so.
You knew that was coming.
I think so with the additional hours, we'll have 3 additional hours each week, so I think that will do it. I won't really know until we start doing it, so we'll start putting it in place. I wanted to make
That
sure
was-
that we were giving the hours to the public as well.
That was my only concern, that I wanted to make sure that you've got your time to do it, that we, I'm fine with this.
You're happy with this?
I think that's the good balance for the extra hours to give back to the community and also give me some of the extra time that I need to get stuff done.
I move acceptance of the proposal.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second.
Been moved to seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'd entertain a vote. All in favor?
Thank you.
Stop sitting around watching people.
All right. The next thing
Go open the library.
on the agenda is childhood.
Yes, this is a proclamation. We did the same thing last year. It's a proclamation for May September, Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. We did it last year, we posted on the sign, it's like on the Facebook pages to make people aware of what the month is important for. It's a very simple
Thank you,
thing.
sir.
Hey, Howard, you can get in touch with me? So that's all this is. If you wanted to acknowledge it, we will track it and make sure it's up on the Facebook and on the website.
Thank you, gentlemen. Hi, ladies.
All right.
Oh my God, they're sending out, aren't they?
What's the pleasure of the board on this? Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you.
That's a motion to have you sign.
Yes. Sure. To the good and better. All right, next thing on there is the warrant.
Which one we gonna do first?
Do we have them here?
38?
We had two warrants.
Let me ask Mike, let me have Mike do the second one, I guess. Do this one first. We got it right here.
Let's see, warrant 41 for $334.14.
Your voice?
Do I hear a second on that?
Second.
Any
We
discussion?
didn't move approval.
Yeah, all right.
All right, second. Instead seconded.
All right, any discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you.
This is the one we said sign.
What, that's when you sign.
Okay.
I'm gonna, Kathy, can you do that one, if you like? Would you like to do that one, Kathy?
Oh, geez, I don't
This
know.
democracy stuff is too much.
I know, I can't do it, it's democracy.
Everybody's gonna be part of the team.
Do the-
Tell me what I'm supposed to do with this.
All right, show her just the last page. Will you do the
Warrant
warrant number?
number,
Yeah,
read the warrant number and then show.
it's warrant number 38. And the warrant total is $541,559.42.
Move acceptance.
Okay, do we hear a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
We need to change the names on the
Yes.
select board sign.
Oh, they are changed on the website.
They are changed on this.
All right, I do have a question.
I do too.
I do too.
And,
You gonna go, you want me
no, I got it right here on page number 6, check number 16940. Said you've got coal patch at Maine Water Works. They have coal patch out there? Did they buy it in bags?
I've always paid for it from there.
Really?
Yeah.
I've seen it before.
Yeah, I called
Morris?
Morris, and they said they always got it there.
50-pound bags of Technics cold patch.
I said, is there any cheaper place? And they said, when I talked to Karen, she said we get the cheapest whatever we have looked around.
Well, they're probably doing bags. Okay, I just thought that, I said,
Not like a pickup truck.
yeah, well, no,
Could
no,
be a-
you load it. It's
There are
okay.
places.
How many bags is that?
49.
49 bags.
50-pound bags.
You signed that, we'll pass this down. Mike, you got a question?
Yeah, on page 1,
Yeah, this one?
well, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Check 16917. That's the fuel, install cook stove. Didn't we approve that once before?
We approved the cook stove, and they did the gas check, but they tried to hook it up too.
This is the
Yeah, but I thought,
installation. This is the installation fee.
okay, I thought we had done it before.
No,
You've done the safety check, and you paid for the stove.
Okay.
This just seems like we could be doing that cheaper someplace else. It's essentially like we just pay the just of fuel, double the price of what.
Well,
the
Gary had
stove was.
indicated, well, the safety check at least indicated that because they're the fuel supplier, that they have to do their own, they do their own safety checks as far as the installation.
go ahead.
Page 8. Check 16917. 6956. It's a page, I assume this is not, this is a special page, it's not.
I don't have the
anything we used to
page
hang
eight.
on our belts.
It's the
Yeah, so
annotation.
who uses those?
It's that big.
Fire department.
What are those?
Yes.
No, the page you read with the final.
There's still, sometimes it's on the minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, I.
To me, it's a page that we stopped using in 1985. Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
I have a question.
Yep.
Just a general question. A few meetings ago, or a meeting or so ago, I asked about checking the Central Maine Power billing. Was that done or looked at all in terms of, Central Maine Power's had so many issues of late that, and we have so many different accounts that, and I just heard recently,
There's an MPUC here,
Yeah.
investigation into the.
but there was a town recently whose sand shed was shut down.
That was shut down during the
Yeah.
storm, that was down in southern Maine.
Yeah, but that was a question that I, where they had paid their bill, but the funds were applied to different accounts that not.
We haven't,
I have a half an ear going over here.
we haven't had that problem with CMP, but we have had that problem
With the cable company or something, right?
with Spectrum, which I was gonna just bring up.
Yeah, yeah. But so I just
But
wanted
we're
to,
gonna be following the CMP case.
yeah,
And
just keep an eye
we'll
on
see what
it.
comes out about
That's all I-
that. But we have not had any problems.
Yeah, just want to make sure.
Notice the rate spike in November, because mine was crazy.
But we didn't.
It literally doubled.
Yeah.
You have to understand, the standard offer price went up.
Yeah.
Oh, that took that into account.
And then,
Thank you.
So,
Okay, thanks.
All right. If everybody's all happy now, I would entertain a vote.
Hang on, let me, we're gonna spot.
Hang on. Melanie been asleep over there.
So the
Don't
old
make
town
fun of the
office and the
respect.
history house, what is the history house?
that's the old town house.
And what's the old town?
The old town office is where we used to sit and rent like
Yeah, and
a.
sweat.
Where do we still have electricity flowing to that building for?
I assume there's some issues with heat, right?
Okay.
There's an alarm issue up there, I think we still have alarms. No, they took the alarms out. Other than that, I don't know what to tell you, I can ask Gary.
We did have a conversation with Gary and with Dan, and I've called CMP twice about it, and they said it was basically the minimum rate. We have a radon.
Oh, that, the radon air filter.
And that's pretty much what's going on, the electricity is the radon thing. According to
The same way with the townhouse, there's nothing up in the townhouse other than the fact.
Outside light, that's it.
Why do we need the outside lighting? It's not on all the time. In the winter time, do we need it?
We have that, well, I don't know if we absolutely need it, I can't tell you right now that we need it or not. It's been on, and I think it's for security purposes to keep people out of the building.
All right, well, that's legitimate.
I was
What
gonna
about-
say, that's
What about
probably
the
the
teen
same
center? The
issue.
teen center, there's nothing happening there in the winter. And that
Tom Caution wants.
Yeah, people-
It does have to keep going on there.
cabin, they use that cabin down there,
No, close it up.
well, why are we paying them?
There's a minimum, I guess, is that.
Yes,
it's
sir.
building space.
Sign this one.
Yep.
That's-
Thank you.
Well, and I put, also on page 3 at the bottom, $216 and change to replace a light.
Yes,
And
there's,
What
right.
kind of light is that? That
No,
should be
no,
on
just
like
don't
a
ask me.
a
They're
dusty
LED
one.
lights. These are lights that are being converted to LED. It's a conversion cost. After the conversion takes place, then because they have to install a new, what is that called? You know what I'm talking about.
The ballast.
Ballast.
Bells, yeah.
And all of that. Once that is all done, and then Gary can change the lights, but they have to have that ballast. And it's fairly expensive.
But you're not gonna have to change the lights very often. These.
No, but we can do it now.
Yeah.
but-
Do it in sections, do it as needed,
Okay.
Anything else?
Let me just look, I didn't take my little cash run as well.
Like mine?
Oh, it keeps me, then I'm not.
I don't see any marks on it, so we
I don't either, I think we're good.
Good.
Okay.
I entertain a vote, and, all in favor? And 4 and 1 mics out, I'm sure you want it.
Extension.
All right, let's jump over to the Town managers.
Okay, just want to let you know that you probably read about all of the rancor involved with the ranked choice voting, whether it's going to occur, whether it's not going to occur.
Yeah.
I've been assured by our town clerk, Carol, that in fact we're all set if it goes forward. Primarily because it's only dealing with a certain type of vote that we'll be getting the ballots for. But if we had local elections, it might create a concern. But right now, it looks like we're all set, but it may not go forward, it may go forward, I have no idea. Spectrum, we're still having a difficulty getting the transfer station telephone back up and operating. They're saying now that the telephone numbers in the pool, it's hard to pull them out of the pool. They got all kinds of excuses. Melanie and I have both been sending them emails back and forth, telling them we need to get it done. We also need to get I think I mentioned this last night, but maybe the time before. But we're at a 15 megabyte pipe coming into the building, and out of the building for internet. We're bumping that up to 100 because we're having problems. We've got the security cameras installed, and that's all taking digital bandwidth. So we're moving that up to 100. And I guess we're trying to get that done. We were supposed to send the paperwork last week. I have a problem with the delays, primarily because if I were a customer as a resident, I go down there and say, I want to get that bill. And it would be on.
I thought Spectrum was already bumped up to that. They were advertising that.
They advertise it as the business speed.
Yeah,
You get 50 megabytes as a resident.
but this,
Well, she came here when she was here, she said she would put them all to her.
that's right.
Well,
Absolutely. That's
it didn't happen.
exactly what they said. They're all 1 to 100.
capability,
You ought to remind of that.
capability.
Reminder.
We have to get the actual, we have to pay for it.
Is Spectrum the only one we can get the phone of the transfer station? Because are we looking, is it a voicemail?
Well, we have to
Is that
get
why it's been-
that.
So,
But
You
we
know,
have,
I-
their internet is through Spectrum too. We have internet that is through Spectrum. It's a pain.
what do we need internet for the transfer station?
Because Kenny receives email, not only email, but he does his calculations, his spreadsheets and all that.
Garbage
And his
updates,
desk up there.
garbage updates.
Yeah.
Okay. As a result of the town meeting, there's a number of things that we're moving on. One is the IT. We've got an RFP out for IT improvements. We didn't have to go out to RFP, but we wanted to go out to make sure we were getting input. The Center for All Seasons Committee on the review. I've got the Recreation Committee that is John Shilton, Travis George, and Lily, of course, will be representing the Recreation Committee. Ernie, I thought you might be on that committee as a representative of the board, but this is to review the abstaining kind of.
Sure.
Of course, Lily will be on it, then Gary Foss will be on it, I'll be on it. We're looking for a citizen or two to be on it. We don't want to go over 10, but we also, I think Hammond or Gagny might want to be, I know Hammond said that they would like to be on it.
Go with the odd number, don't go with the even number.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, but, so we're looking at 10 or 11 people. We'll go with that. But,
I'd go with 7.
so if you have any suggestions for citizens that you think that might be, a good fit to review that,
You want to suggest, you want it now, or you want us to come in later?
I'd like to have it as soon as I can get it, so I can get this committee up
I
and
would
running.
suggest Kip McClure.
Ronald,
His name is actually Ronald, I believe, but that's right, Kip. He's down in Little Village Road, or whatever that's called. But he's got pretty good carpentry background.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Look at it for another carpenter. Somebody's got some.
Yeah. You also want to get people who have something vested, because the concern, as we discussed it, if you remember, at the budget meeting, was to make sure that the town could accept whatever the outcome was. We wanted to make sure we got a cross-section kind of feel for that, right? Is that what you were saying, Ernie?
Sure.
Gonna have to.
Can I ask you to backtrack a minute? You finished with that item? The IT, that, you talked about the computers?
That is, yeah, the software.
Software, okay, thank you.
School board members, we had, I don't know if everyone saw what Howard put out. I think Howard went to the meeting and he put out the spreadsheet and all that. I thought he had sent it to everyone, but maybe I didn't see it. I'll send it out now. It was a 15-page slide overview of the presentation that Carl made. And in it, it essentially indicated we're going to have a flat or negative budget increase, minor negative, as a result of some of the money we got from the state last year. We still have that flowing through the system. So that's good news. And that's even with the bond and all that. My sense is the reason for that is more money flowed out of the state toward the school this year. It wasn't a matter of cuts. Those cuts, they haven't adopted that budget, but that's what it's looking like in his recommended budget. Code enforcement hours, you know, that Gary was increased to 25 hours. We worked out a schedule where he'll be in Tuesday 8 to 4, Wednesday 12 to 4, Thursday 12 to 7 in the office or doing business in the town. Every other Thursday from 12 to the end of the planning board meeting, because he always attends those. And any remaining hours, there might be an hour or two, maybe not, left. But he'll set that up as an appointment or more time in the office.
Will you put that on the calendar?
That's already
on the calendar?
been put out on the LED just for an initial notification. And we'll be putting that on the calendar and on the website.
Now, the time's till 7 on Thursday nights, as has normally been, that's when the code enforcement officer was available for the
Right.
public. So is that still gonna be?
12 to 7, yes.
12 to 7, okay.
Can you also put the new library hours on the electronic?
We can put that, yeah. They just weren't approved yet, so. that's what- They hadn't been approved until tonight, that's why.
I realize that, now that they have.
The couple enforcement issues, Ben's Auto, as you know, we sent that to the lawyer. The lawyers summons them. They were supposed to go to court April 3rd today. However, the summons didn't get issued in time, so they have to back up on it. Now it's April 18th. Gary will be going to that. I may go to it, I don't know. Ben's Auto was saying that they didn't get notified. I asked Gary, and he said, well, they've been notified just like. I guess there was a case when there was a storm that was down and the town office closed. They came to, there was a planning board meeting that night, or, planning board meeting. They came and they said, well, no one told us, but it was all.
I'm sure they came.
Anyhow, that's an issue. The other issue that you may hear a little bit more about, and it's a planning board issue, but it's potentially going to become an appeals board issue, and you should just be aware of it. There's a Brightside Arena, I believe, they do have their permit before, a commercial permit before the planning board. The planning board has reviewed it. There's a dimensional issue in terms of a certain requirement in terms of square footage that they can have a certain building on. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the planning board will deny that permit, although they haven't said that to me, but that's my sense based on what I understand the dimensional issue is. And consequently, there's going to be an appeal to the board. As you know, or as many of you know, the type of review that's going to, appeal that's going to be requested will be asked to gain monetary relief because that is impacting their ability to gain sufficient revenue from their property, right? So I don't believe that's something that the appeals board, I don't have all the facts, they'll decide, but I don't think that's something that the appeals board is likely to approve based on my term on the appeals board. But having said that, it's a new appeals board, and they may, in fact, approve that dimensional issue that's in the shortage.
I have a question about that. The makeshift boat landing that he has there, is that part of
It's all part of it.
it's down,
It's marina.
it's off the U.
It's, if you go down Newland Road,
Yep.
right past that new building where the antique place used to be,
Yeah.
you take a right down there.
Yeah.
It's right down there on the left.
On the left, yeah. But I think at one time you mentioned that boat landing wasn't approved, you know, that's not a,
Yeah.
and so I don't know.
Yeah, and
Is that, where
the
does that
board-
stand in relation to this?
Yeah, the state came down, looked at that, they didn't, they asked for some modifications being made to that, right, parking area,
Yeah.
as well as that one area, apparently they let that go.
They
The
bounded or?
state.
The
The
state?
state essentially said it wasn't significant. Again, I'll have to get
Oh,
that
okay.
information, but I believe that was their,
Okay.
they did not take action against it in any case.
Oh, all right.
That doesn't preempt the town, though, does it?
No, it doesn't preempt the town, but we're waiting for this commercial.
Okay.
The TAN, we received the TAN last Friday, right? It was late Friday afternoon. We were able to get it into Skowhegan Bank so that we didn't lose interest over the weekend. We were a little bit disappointed. I think Melanie could say she was more than a little disappointed that it came in late the way it did, but we had some problems with getting it from the Bangor Bank here. But that's an issue that we'll address. It may have to think about in terms of future TAN notes from Bangor. It may have been just a week, I don't know. Did you have anything you want to say about that? So, with that, I'm finished. Thank God.
You've had quite an evening.
We had, we have a problem. We had a problem, similar problem, which we alleviated when Ernie left the board. No longer have two Ernies. We now have two Melanies. What are we gonna do with that, so we can tell them apart what we're talking about? One of you have a
One
nickname?
was goddess and one was princess.
That's not gonna happen.
Well, I don't think it will necessarily be a problem.
You can never have too many melons.
Oh, how nice of you.
It's one of those problems that will linger no matter what we do.
All right, anybody else got anything they want
Plug
to
them up. That worked last
bring up? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. This is too long.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
I second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
I hope it wasn't my agenda.
Melanie doesn't want to go. I go. Melanie, I want to talk to you about that.